On the way to the business district in Maycomb is the house of Mrs. Dubose, a cantankerous old lady who always shouts at Jim and Scout as they pass by. Atticus warns Jim to be a gentleman to her because she is old and sick, but one day she tells the children that Atticus is not any better than any N-words and trash he works for, and Jim loses his temper. Jim takes a baton from Scout and destroys all of Mrs. Dubose's camellia bushes. As punishment, Jim must go to her house every day for a month and read to her. At this point, I'd like to go to the book, page 138 and 139. When Atticus finds out what has been done, he comes in and says to Jim, "You did this because she said that?" Jim's lips moved, but his "yes, sir" was inaudible. "Son, I have no doubt that you've been annoyed by your contemporaries about me lawing for N-words, as you say. But to do something like this to a sick old lady is inexcusable. I strongly advise you to go down and have a talk with Mrs. Dubose," said Atticus. "Come straight home afterwards." As punishment, Jim must go to her house every day for a month and read to her. Scout accompanies him, and they endure Mrs. Dubose's abuse and peculiar fits, which occur at the end of every reading session. Each session is longer than the one before. Mrs. Dubose dies a little more than a month after Jim's punishment ends. Atticus reveals to Jim that she was addicted to morphine and that the reading was part of her successful effort to combat this addiction. Atticus gives Jim a box that Mrs. Dubose had given her made for Jim. In it lies a single white camellia. I'd like to direct your attention to page 149 of the text. "A lady," Jim raised his head. His face was scarlet. "After all those things she said about you, a lady?" Atticus replies, "She was. She had her own views about things, a lot different from mine. Maybe. Son, I told you that if you hadn't lost your head, I'd have made you go read to her. I wanted you to see something about her. I wanted you to see what real courage is, instead of getting the idea that courage is a man with a gun in his hand. It's when you know you're licked before you begin, but you begin anyway, and you see it through no matter what. You rarely win, but sometimes you do. Mrs. Dubose won, all 98 pounds of her. According to her views, she died beholden to nothing and nobody. She was the bravest person I ever knew." Jim picked up the candy box and threw it in the fire. He picked up the camellia, and when I went off to bed, I saw him fingering the wide petals. Atticus was reading the paper. This is also significant because Mrs. Dubose's white camellias do have a second symbolism. Mrs. Dubose tells Jim that he couldn't kill the flowers because he needed to pull them up from the root and not actually just destroy the heads of the flowers. This is an important symbol of racism in Maycomb. It's hard to kill, and you have to attack it from the roots. Just ridding the town of some of the racist people is not going to stop the racism, which is deep-seated. It thrives in acidic soil. The racism is like a toxicity, but it continues to thrive, and it will not be destroyed until the root of it is destroyed. Mrs. Dubose is infected with a disease, just like the disease of Maycomb, which is racism. It grows rapidly, and it's infectious. Jim cuts off the top of the heads of the camellias, but they just grow back, exactly the way racism works in Maycomb.